Jack Peterson sat at his favorite spot in Green Haven Cafe, a small coffee shop nestled on the corner of his suburban neighborhood in Denver, Colorado. It was a regular Tuesday morning, and the sun was just beginning to rise over the city, casting a golden light across the quiet streets. Jack, a project manager at a tech company downtown, enjoyed starting his day early, taking a few moments to himself before the busy schedule of meetings and deadlines took over. Sipping his black coffee, he took in the familiar surroundings, the soft hum of the coffee machines, the scent of roasted beans mingling with the faint whiff of pastries from the counter, and the gentle chatter of a few other early risers who had made this their morning ritual too. Jack found comfort in this routine, as he did in most things in life. He was a man of habit, preferring the predictability of a well-ordered life. His wife Sarah often teased him about it, calling him Mr. Predictable with a playful smile. He thought about Sarah, who was likely still asleep at home. They had been married for 12 years, and in that time their life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Sarah worked as a graphic designer, often freelancing from home, which allowed her to spend more time with their 7-year-old daughter, Emily. Their daughter was the light of Jack's life, and he looked forward to their family evenings, reading bedtime stories and hearing about Emily's day at school. Their life wasn't particularly glamorous, but it was happy and stable. After finishing his coffee, Jack glanced at his watch, a gift from Sarah for their 10th anniversary, and gathered his things to head to work. The drive downtown took him about 30 minutes, giving him just enough time to mentally prepare for the day ahead. His office was located on the top floor of a modern glass building with sweeping views of the Rockies in the distance. Jack often thought of his work as his own little world, neatly compartmentalized away from his home life. As the weeks went by, he noticed that Sarah had become a bit more distant. She was always polite, always smiling, but there was a subtle change in her demeanor that Jack couldn't quite place. She seemed preoccupied, a little quieter than usual, and often retreated to her studio for hours, working late into the evening. When he asked about her work, she brushed it off, saying she was just catching up on some projects. Jack brushed it off as well. He chalked it up to the regular stresses of life. After all, they had been together for over a decade, and relationships were bound to evolve over time. He reassured himself that maybe she just needed some space and that things would go back to normal. He was usually busy with his own work projects, and as a couple, they had always given each other room to grow. One Thursday evening, Jack came home a little earlier than usual. He had been working late on a big project over the past few weeks, and it had started to take its toll. Sarah and Emily were out at Emily's ballet class, so he decided to take the opportunity to unwind alone. He made himself a quick dinner and sat down on the couch, flipping through channels absent-mindedly. As he sat there in the quiet, his mind drifted to Sarah. He found himself thinking back to the early days of their relationship. They had met in college, both full of dreams and plans for the future. She had been so vibrant, so full of life, and they had shared a deep bond, a connection that felt unbreakable. They had supported each other through their careers, the ups and downs, and everything in between. It was that memory of their early days that brought a pang of nostalgia, a small longing to recapture that spark. The door opened, and Sarah walked in with Emily, her face lighting up as she saw him. "You're home early," she said, clearly surprised. Jack smiled, pushing his thoughts aside. "Yeah, I thought I'd give myself a little break." They spent the evening together, reading Emily's favorite story about a brave knight and a friendly dragon, then tucking her into bed. Jack felt a warmth he hadn't realized he had missed. It reminded him of the simple joy of their family life, the contentment he had always taken for granted. After Emily fell asleep, he and Sarah sat on the couch, watching a movie and laughing together. It felt like old times, and for a moment, Jack felt reassured that maybe everything was okay. But as the days continued, that subtle distance returned. Jack noticed that Sarah was spending more time away from home, going out with friends or staying late at her studio. He didn't want to pry. He trusted her, of course. But there was a growing unease in his chest, a gnawing worry that he tried to push down. One evening, while Sarah was in the shower, Jack found himself scrolling through old photos on his phone, remembering vacations they had taken, family gatherings, and holidays. There was a photo of Sarah, taken at a beach in California, where she looked carefree and radiant. It was the Sarah he knew, or at least the one he thought he knew. He wondered if maybe he had been too wrapped up in his work, too absorbed in his own world, and had somehow missed the signs of her growing dissatisfaction. That night, Jack lay in bed, his mind racing with questions. He thought about the sacrifices they had both made for their family, the way they had worked together to build a life they were proud of. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping away. He tried to ignore it, telling himself that they were just going through a rough patch, that this was normal. He reminded himself of the love they shared, the life they had built, and how strong they had always been together. As he drifted off to sleep, he resolved to talk to her, to find a way to bring them closer again. He wanted to believe that whatever was causing this distance could be fixed. After all, they were a team. They had always been able to face challenges together. The next morning, Jack woke up to find Sarah already awake, sitting by the window with a cup of coffee, staring out at the street. She looked lost in thought, her expression unreadable. He approached her, putting a hand on her shoulder. She smiled up at him, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes that he couldn't quite decipher. "Are you okay?" he asked gently, feeling the words catch in his throat. She nodded, but her gaze drifted back to the window. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just thinking." Jack forced a smile, feeling the weight of the silence between them. He didn't push her for more, choosing instead to give her a quick kiss on the forehead before heading out to work. But as he left, he couldn't shake the feeling that their life, their love, was changing in ways he wasn't ready for, and he was starting to fear that he might be losing her. As the weekend approached, Jack tried to shake off the nagging feeling that something was off. He convinced himself that work stress had caused him to read too much into Sarah's recent mood. They both had busy lives, after all, and he reasoned that couples went through ebbs and flows. Still, that tiny seed of doubt was planted deep in his mind. On Saturday morning, Jack offered to take Emily to her soccer practice so that Sarah could have a quiet morning to herself. He hoped the small gesture might bring a smile to her face, but she merely thanked him with a distracted nod. Watching her from the doorway, he couldn't shake the image of her staring out the window, lost in thought. At the soccer field, he found himself only half watching Emily and her teammates running up and down the grass. His mind drifted back to Sarah, thinking of how she used to be more engaged with him, sharing stories and talking about her day. Now her conversations felt like summaries with little detail. She used to tell him everything. He caught himself scrolling through his messages to see if he had missed anything that might give him a hint of what was happening. Nothing seemed unusual. After practice, Jack and Emily stopped by the ice cream shop as a treat. Sitting across from his daughter, Jack watched her happily eat her cone, her eyes lighting up with excitement as she told him about her new friend, Grace, and the games they played together. In that moment, he felt a pang of guilt. He realized he had been so absorbed in his worries that he had barely been present with his daughter. "How's Mommy been?" he asked Emily, trying to keep his voice casual. Emily shrugged. "She's okay. She's been busy with her work." Jack nodded, watching her. She was so young, so innocent. He wanted to shield her from any tension at home. They finished their ice cream, and he took her to the park before heading home, trying to enjoy the moment. That night, Jack suggested they all watch a movie together, hoping to spend some family time and maybe catch a glimpse of the warmth he missed from Sarah. She agreed, but as the movie began, Jack noticed her phone lighting up beside her on the couch. She glanced at it quickly, her face momentarily shadowed with something that looked like worry. "Everything okay?" he asked quietly, trying not to sound too curious. "Yeah," she said, a bit too quickly, putting her phone face down on the table. "Just a message from one of the girls." Jack tried to ignore the twinge of suspicion that crept in, but he couldn't help noticing that she didn't pick up her phone for the rest of the movie. When it ended, Sarah gathered her things and went upstairs, saying she was tired. After putting Emily to bed, Jack found himself alone in the living room, the silence pressing down on him. He tried to brush it off as paranoia, but something inside him urged him to check her phone. She had never hidden anything from him before, and they had always been open about messages and social media. But the way she had quickly turned the phone over, it left him uneasy. He went upstairs and saw her phone charging on the nightstand. She was already in bed, her back turned to him. Jack felt a pang of guilt at the thought of snooping, but he knew he needed to put his mind at ease. After taking a deep breath, he gently picked up her phone, feeling his heart race as he looked at the lock screen. There were no recent notifications. Jack returned the phone and climbed into bed beside her, his mind a tangled mess of worry and guilt. He wanted to confront her, but he didn't want to come off as paranoid or accuse her without cause. He decided to wait to give her the benefit of the doubt and see if this was just a temporary phase. The following week, Jack threw himself into work, trying to distract himself from the tension at home. He had a big deadline approaching, and his project was critical for the company. Yet, despite his efforts, he couldn't concentrate fully. His mind kept drifting to Sarah, to her distant gaze, and the subtle change in her tone when she spoke to him. Thursday arrived, and as Jack finished his work and prepared to head home, his phone buzzed. It was a message from his colleague, Mark, reminding him of a team outing that night. Jack had completely forgotten about it, an informal gathering at a local bar to celebrate a recent success. He'd almost declined, but he hesitated, wondering if a night out might be the break he needed. Besides, it would give Sarah some space, which he thought might ease the tension between them. As Jack entered the bar, he felt a strange sense of relief wash over him. It had been a while since he'd been out with friends, and he realized how much he missed these carefree moments. The evening passed in a blur of laughter and stories, and for a few hours he managed to forget about the worries that had consumed him. But as the night wore on, he felt a subtle pull back to reality. He checked his watch. It was past 10. He hadn't told Sarah he would be out late, and he didn't want her to worry. Stepping outside for some air, he quickly dialed her number. It rang a few times before she picked up. "Hey, Sarah," he said, trying to keep his tone light. "I'm just out with some friends from work. I'll be home soon." There was a pause before she answered, and he could hear noise in the background. A faint murmur of voices, laughter, and music. "Oh, okay," she replied. "I'm actually out too, just grabbing drinks with Vicky and the girls." He felt a strange sense of relief and unease at the same time. "That sounds nice. Have fun." As he hung up, Jack realized how odd it felt to be apart from her on a Thursday night. They had always spent their evenings together, and this was the first time he could remember them both being out separately. It felt strange, as if they were two strangers living parallel lives. When Jack got home, the house was quiet and dark. He made his way to the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water, feeling a strange hollowness in his chest. Sarah's car was in the driveway, but she wasn't in the living room. He guessed she had gone to bed, so he quietly climbed the stairs, careful not to wake her. As he entered the bedroom, he saw her asleep on her side, her back facing him. He couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness, noticing how they seemed to be drifting further and further apart. Lying beside her, he stared at the ceiling, his mind racing. He couldn't escape the feeling that something was wrong, that he was missing something crucial. The following morning, Jack awoke to find Sarah already downstairs making breakfast. She greeted him with a smile, but it felt strained, and her eyes seemed distant. As he poured himself a cup of coffee, he noticed that she wasn't wearing her wedding ring. It was a small detail, but it hit him like a punch to the gut. "Did you have fun last night?" he asked, trying to keep his tone casual. "Yeah," she replied, glancing at him briefly before turning back to her cooking. It was nice to catch up with the girls. Jack hesitated, wanting to ask her why she wasn't wearing her ring, but he decided against it. He didn't want to seem possessive or paranoid, and he reminded himself that it was probably just a coincidence. But as he sat down to eat, a heavy silence settled between them. He could feel the distance between them growing, an invisible wall that seemed to keep them apart. He wondered if she felt it too, or if he was the only one noticing the gradual erosion of their connection. In his mind, he ran through all the possible reasons for her behavior, trying to make sense of the changes he was seeing. But the more he thought about it, the more lost he felt. His life, once so steady and predictable, now felt like it was teetering on the edge of something he couldn't control. As he left for work that morning, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing at a crossroads, caught between his desire to trust her and the growing suspicion that something was slipping away. And for the first time, he found himself wondering if their marriage could survive the silent storm that was gathering between them. Over the next few days, Jack's unease grew. He kept replaying small moments in his mind. Sarah's distance, her late nights, the absence of her wedding ring. These moments felt like puzzle pieces, hints pointing to something just outside his grasp. At first, he convinced himself it was work stress or just a rough patch in their marriage. But as each day passed, Jack found it harder to ignore the sinking feeling in his gut. One evening, as Jack sat at his desk in his home office, he decided to speak with Mark, his closest friend at work. Mark was a good listener and often gave straightforward advice. Jack trusted him and hoped that talking to him might help bring some clarity to his muddled thoughts. "Hey, Mark," Jack started, his voice wavering slightly. "Can I talk to you about something personal?" "Of course," Mark replied, his tone genuine. "What's going on?" Jack hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. I think something's wrong with my marriage. Sarah has been acting differently. She's distant, she's out late more often, and I'm starting to wonder if there's something, or someone else." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I get it, man. Sometimes people just go through phases. Maybe she's feeling stressed, or maybe she just needs to find herself. But listen, if you really think there's something more, maybe it's time to have a serious conversation with her." Jack nodded, even though Mark couldn't see him. "You're right. I don't want to accuse her of anything without knowing. I want to trust her, but this feeling won't go away." After they finished the call, Jack sat back, deep in thought. He knew that he couldn't let this uncertainty eat away at him any longer. He resolved to speak with Sarah that weekend, hoping that a heart-to-heart conversation might help clear the air. But before Saturday came, fate seemed to intervene. On Friday evening, Sarah mentioned that she'd be meeting her friends for dinner. Jack smiled and said goodbye, doing his best to mask the anxious thoughts swirling in his mind. After she left, Jack sat in the quiet house, his mind racing. The feeling of dread was almost overwhelming, and he felt a desperate need to know the truth. Without fully realizing it, Jack found himself in their bedroom, standing by Sarah's vanity. Her phone was still on the nightstand, charging. Normally, he would never consider looking through her things. Trust had always been a cornerstone of their relationship. But the gnawing doubt had become unbearable, and he found himself picking up her phone, his hands trembling slightly. The lock screen showed no recent notifications, but Jack remembered that Sarah often used her laptop to communicate for work and personal matters. He went to her office, opening her laptop, and felt a pang of guilt as he powered it on. But his need to know outweighed his hesitation. As the laptop booted up, he opened her email. He scrolled through recent messages, his heart pounding as he sifted through mundane work emails. But then he saw a thread with the subject line, "Dinner plans," sent from a name he didn't recognize. "TR," he hesitated, staring at the message. He clicked on it, feeling like he was on the edge of a cliff. The message was short. "Asterisk looking forward to tonight. 8 p.m. at Matteo's, right? Can't wait to see you. Asterisk." Jack felt his heart drop. The email wasn't from a friend or coworker. It was clear, reading between the lines, that this wasn't a casual dinner plan. Just as he was about to close the laptop, he saw a few more messages between Sarah and this TR person, each one more revealing than the last. They exchanged compliments, talked about their lives, and reminisced about moments they'd shared, moments Jack had never known about. As he read, his worst fears solidified into reality. Unable to look any longer, Jack closed the laptop and sat in silence. He felt numb, as if he had stepped outside of himself. He had never felt this kind of betrayal before, and the weight of it was crushing. Memories of their life together, their wedding, their laughter, all clashed with the words he had just read. He spent the rest of the evening pacing the house, wondering how to confront her. Should he demand answers? Ask her outright about TR. He tried to stay calm, to think clearly, but the pain was blinding. When he finally heard Sarah's car pull into the driveway, he felt a surge of adrenaline. His heart pounded as he braced himself for the conversation. Sarah entered the house, smiling as she set her bag down and walked into the living room. "Hey," she greeted him, her voice light. Jack felt a chill at the sight of her calm demeanor. "Hey," he replied, struggling to keep his voice steady. He waited until she was seated on the couch before speaking again. "How was your dinner?" "Oh, it was nice. Just caught up with the girls." "Nothing too exciting," she replied casually, avoiding his gaze. Jack clenched his fists, struggling to control the storm of emotions building inside him. "Sarah, is there anything you want to tell me?" She looked up, her expression shifting as she sensed the tension in his voice. "What do you mean? Are you seeing someone else?" The words felt like shards of glass in his throat. Sarah's face paled, and for a moment she looked stunned. But then, to his surprise, she didn't deny it. Her shoulders slumped, and she looked down at her hands. "Jack, I didn't mean for it to happen." A wave of anger and heartbreak surged through him. "Didn't mean for what to happen, Sarah? What exactly happened?" She took a shaky breath, her voice barely a whisper. "I met someone a few months ago. It started as a friendship, but it became more than that." Jack felt as if the ground had been ripped out from under him. "And who is he?" "This TR?" "His name is Tom," she admitted, her voice trembling. "We met at a work event, and we just connected. I can't explain it, Jack. I know this sounds terrible, but I felt like I hadn't been seen in so long, like I was just fading away." He stood up, feeling a mixture of rage and sadness. "So you just decided to throw away everything we built together for a moment with someone else?" "Sarah, we have a daughter. How could you do this?" Tears welled up in her eyes, and she covered her face with her hands. "I know I've hurt you, Jack. I know I've betrayed you, and I don't deserve your forgiveness. I felt so lost, and he made me feel alive again. I'm not trying to make excuses. I just want you to know how I got here." Jack looked at her, feeling hollow. The woman he had loved for over a decade, the mother of his child, was confessing to an affair, and it shattered him. He struggled to find words to even comprehend the situation. The Sarah he knew, the Sarah he had built a life with, suddenly felt like a stranger. "So what now?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Are you leaving us for him?" She shook her head, wiping away her tears. "No, I don't want to leave. I want to fix this, Jack. I know I've broken your trust, but I love you and Emily more than anything. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make this right." Jack stared at her, feeling a whirlwind of emotions. He wanted to scream, to lash out, but he also felt a painful yearning to hold on to the life they had built. Part of him wanted to believe that they could get through this, that their family could survive this betrayal. After a long silence, he took a deep breath. "I don't know, Sarah. I don't know if I can forgive this, or if I even want to try. But for Emily's sake, I'll think about it." She nodded, her face filled with regret. "Thank you, Jack. I don't deserve it, but thank you." Jack turned and walked away, retreating to the guest room. He needed space, time to process everything. That night, he lay awake, haunted by the memories of what they once had and the uncertainty of what lay ahead. And as dawn broke, he knew that whatever he decided, life as he knew it would never be the same. The following days felt like a fog for Jack. Every time he looked at Sarah, he felt a mixture of anger, sadness, and betrayal, emotions that kept him on edge. He avoided her as much as possible, staying late at work and spending nights in the guest room. Emily sensed the tension between them, and it broke Jack's heart to see confusion in her eyes. She didn't understand why things felt different, why Daddy didn't read her bedtime stories with the same smile, or why Mommy seemed to always have tears in her eyes. Sarah tried to reach out, to explain herself further, but Jack wasn't ready to hear it. He needed time to process, to understand if he could even consider forgiving her. Each attempt she made only reopened the wound, making him relive the painful reality of her betrayal. One evening, as Jack was returning home from work, he found Sarah waiting for him in the living room. She looked exhausted, her face pale and eyes swollen from crying. She had been waiting for him to come home so they could finally talk. "Jack, please," she said, her voice trembling. "We can't go on like this. I need to know what you're thinking, what you want. I need to know if there's any hope left for us." Jack sat down across from her, his face hard and expressionless. "Hope?" he replied, his voice cold. "You expect me to just ignore what happened? To act like everything's okay?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "No, Jack, I know I don't deserve that. I know what I did was unforgivable, and I don't expect you to just move on. But I can't bear this silence. I need to know if you'll even consider giving me a chance to make things right." Jack looked away, his jaw clenched. He wanted to shout to release the anger building inside him, but he held back. Instead, he took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Sarah, you were the last person in the world I thought would hurt me like this," he said quietly. "You and Emily are my whole life. I gave you everything, trusted you completely, and you threw it all away for what? For a fling? For some thrill?" Sarah's face crumpled, and she covered her face with her hands, sobbing. "I know, Jack. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't expect it. I was selfish, and I made a terrible mistake. I wish I could take it all back, but I can't. All I can do now is ask for your forgiveness and promise that I'll do whatever it takes to rebuild what I've broken." Jack felt a surge of bitterness. "And how do you plan to do that, Sarah? How do you expect me to just forget what you did?" She looked up at him, her eyes desperate. "I'll go to counseling. I'll do anything you ask. Just, please, give me a chance." Jack sat in silence, grappling with his feelings. He thought about Emily, about the family they had built, and the life he had dreamed of. Part of him wanted to walk away, to leave and never look back, but another part of him couldn't bear the thought of breaking up their family, of putting Emily through the pain of a separation. After a long pause, he finally spoke. "Fine, we'll try counseling. But don't think for a second that this means I've forgiven you. I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust you again. But for Emily's sake, I'll give it a chance." Relief flooded Sarah's face, and she nodded, wiping her tears. "Thank you, Jack. I know it's not enough, but thank you. I'll do whatever it takes." In the weeks that followed, they started attending couples counseling. The sessions were grueling, forcing Jack to confront his emotions and articulate the pain he felt. Sarah opened up about her feelings of loneliness, her struggles with self-worth, and how she had felt unnoticed and unappreciated. Jack found it difficult to sympathize, his own hurt and betrayal overshadowing any understanding he might have felt. The counselor encouraged them to communicate openly, to be honest about their feelings. It was painful, but Jack could feel a sliver of hope beginning to form, even if it was fragile and uncertain. He knew that rebuilding trust would take time and effort, and he wasn't even sure if he wanted to try. But for now, he was willing to see where it led. One night, after a particularly intense counseling session, Jack lay awake in the guest room, staring at the ceiling. His mind raced with memories of their life together, the good times, the laughter, the love they had once shared. He wanted to believe that they could get back to that place, that they could find a way to heal. But every time he thought of Tom, of the betrayal, it felt like a dagger in his heart. He wondered if Sarah was truly committed to making things right, or if she was just saying what she thought he wanted to hear. The doubt gnawed at him, and he found himself questioning every interaction, every gesture. He hated feeling this way, so suspicious and guarded. It was exhausting, and he didn't know how much longer he could keep it up. As the days turned into weeks, Jack continued to wrestle with his feelings. He could see that Sarah was making an effort, doing her best to rebuild his trust. She was open about her activities, often texting him throughout the day and being transparent about her whereabouts. But even with her efforts, Jack felt a wall between them, an invisible barrier that kept them apart. One evening, as they sat down for dinner with Emily, Jack felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. For the first time in weeks, the tension in the air seemed to lift, and they managed to share a peaceful meal together. Emily chattered excitedly about her day at school, and for a brief moment it felt like old times. After they put Emily to bed, Sarah turned to him, a hopeful look in her eyes. "Thank you, Jack," she whispered, "for giving me this chance. I know it's not easy, but I'm grateful." Jack nodded, his expression softening. "I'm trying, Sarah, I really am. But it's going to take time. A lot of time." She nodded, understanding. "I know, and I'm not going anywhere. I'll wait as long as it takes." As he looked at her, he felt a flicker of the love they had once shared. It wasn't enough to erase the pain, but it was something. A small, fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way back to each other. In the months that followed, Jack and Sarah continued their counseling sessions and worked hard to rebuild their connection. At times, Jack found himself almost believing they could get back to what they once had. He wanted to move forward for Emily's sake and to hold on to the family he'd built with Sarah. However, the lingering memory of her betrayal would often resurface, filling him with a fresh wave of doubt and anger. As they approached the holiday season, Jack hoped the time together as a family might bring them closer. Thanksgiving was around the corner, and they planned to visit Jack's parents in a nearby town for the weekend. It would be the first time they spent a holiday together since everything had happened, and Jack was cautiously optimistic that a change of scenery might help. The morning they were set to leave, Jack loaded the car with their luggage and Emily's travel toys, while Sarah finished packing. As he went back into the house to grab the last of their bags, he noticed Sarah sitting on the edge of the bed, holding her phone, her face pale and tense. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice neutral. She looked up, startled, and quickly put her phone down. "Yeah, I was just making sure I had everything." Jack felt a familiar pang of suspicion, but he forced himself to ignore it. He didn't want to ruin the holiday before it even began. They got into the car and headed out, and as they drove, he tried to focus on the weekend ahead, on spending time with his parents and giving Emily a happy Thanksgiving. But as they settled in at his parents' house, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Sarah seemed distant, more reserved than usual, and he caught her glancing at her phone several times throughout the day. That evening after dinner, he saw her slip away to the guest room, where he assumed she was going to check her messages in private. Unable to resist, Jack waited a few moments before quietly following her. He stood outside the door, his heart pounding, listening to her muffled voice as she spoke softly. He couldn't make out the words, but the tone was enough to stir the doubts he had tried so hard to bury. When she came out of the room, Jack was waiting for her in the hallway. She looked up in surprise, and he saw the guilt flash across her face before she quickly masked it. "Who were you talking to, Sarah?" he asked, his voice low. She hesitated, her eyes darting away. "Just a friend." "It's nothing, Jack." "A friend?" he repeated, his patience wearing thin. "You've been acting strange all day, and I can't help but feel like something's going on. Are you talking to him again?" She shook her head, her voice pleading. "No, Jack, I told you I ended things with him. I haven't spoken to him since we started counseling." Jack searched her face, wanting to believe her but feeling the familiar pang of distrust. "I need to see your phone, Sarah, right now." She looked down, her face going pale. "Jack, please." The hesitation told him everything he needed to know. Without waiting for her permission, he reached for her phone. She didn't try to stop him, just watched, her face full of dread. Jack opened her messages and quickly found a thread labeled with a familiar name, *Tom*. His heart sank as he scrolled through the messages, each one a fresh stab of betrayal. They weren't explicit, but the tone was unmistakably familiar. There were messages about missing each other, about their shared memories, and even vague plans to meet up. He looked up at her, his face etched with hurt and anger. "You lied to me. After everything, after all the promises, you're still talking to him." She swallowed, tears brimming in her eyes. "Jack, it's not what you think. I haven't seen him. I felt so alone, and I needed someone to talk to. I know it was wrong, but I couldn't help it." Jack felt a surge of frustration and betrayal. "So you decided to go back to the one person who nearly destroyed our marriage?" After all the effort I've put into forgiving you, after all the pain you caused." "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I never meant to hurt you again." But the apology felt hollow, and Jack felt a cold resolve settle over him. He turned and walked out of the room, heading back downstairs, needing space to think. The sense of betrayal was overwhelming, more intense than before. This wasn't just a single mistake. It was a pattern, a choice she had made to continue deceiving him even after he'd given her a second chance. Later that evening, after Emily had gone to bed, Jack and Sarah sat down in the living room. His parents were quietly watching TV in the next room, but he didn't care if they overheard. He needed to say what was on his mind. "Sarah, I don't know if I can do this anymore," he said, his voice steady but filled with pain. "I thought we were rebuilding, that we were starting to move forward. But now I see that nothing's changed." She looked down, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I'm sorry, Jack. I don't know why I did it. I've been struggling, and I felt like you were still distant. I felt like I had no one to turn to." Jack shook his head, bitterness seeping into his tone. "So you went back to him. You didn't come to me, your husband. You didn't try to work through this with me. You just went back to the one person who caused all of this." She opened her mouth to respond, but he held up a hand to stop her. "I don't want to hear excuses. I'm done, Sarah. I don't know if I can keep trying when it's clear you don't value what we had." They sat in silence, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Sarah sobbed quietly, her shoulders shaking, but Jack felt numb. He had poured everything into trying to fix their marriage, but now he saw that his efforts had been in vain. She had chosen someone else over him again, and he couldn't ignore that any longer. That night, he stayed in the guest room at his parents' house, his mind racing as he stared up at the ceiling. He knew that whatever happened next, things would never be the same. He would have to make a choice to either walk away or try to pick up the shattered pieces of their marriage once more. But deep down, he felt as though his heart had already made the decision for him. In the morning, he told his parents that they'd be heading back home early. Sarah tried to speak to him, to apologize, but he kept his responses curt, refusing to engage. The drive back was silent, the atmosphere heavy with tension. Emily, sensing the mood, sat quietly in the back seat, her small face full of confusion and worry. When they arrived home, Jack helped Emily with her things and went straight to the guest room, needing space to clear his head. He knew he needed to decide how to move forward, to think about what was best for Emily, for himself, and even for Sarah. But the thought of staying in this marriage, of pretending everything was okay, felt unbearable. That evening, after putting Emily to bed, he sat Sarah down one final time. "Sarah," he said, his voice steady, though his heart ached with the weight of his decision. "I can't keep doing this. I tried to forgive you, to trust you again, but you broke that trust a second time. I can't keep holding on to something that's hurting both of us. For our sake, and for Emily's, I think it's time we separate." Sarah's face crumpled, and she reached out for his hand, but he pulled away. "Please, Jack, don't do this." But his resolve was firm. "I have to, Sarah. I've given everything I can, and I can't keep losing myself in this. I'll always care about you, and I want what's best for Emily, but I need to move on." They sat in silence, both of them realizing the finality of his words. Jack felt a bittersweet mixture of relief and sorrow, knowing that while he was ending one chapter of his life, he was also stepping into an uncertain future. But he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't keep living in a marriage filled with lies and betrayal. As he walked away, he felt the weight lifting from his shoulders, a glimmer of hope emerging from the pain. It would be difficult, and there would be challenges ahead, but he knew that for the first time in months, he was finally moving toward a new beginning, one where he could find peace. The weeks following Jack's decision to separate were a blur of legal meetings, discussions with Sarah, and difficult conversations with Emily. It broke his heart to explain to his daughter that he and Sarah wouldn't be living together anymore, but he did his best to reassure her that both her parents still loved her deeply. Emily was too young to fully understand, but she sensed the shift in her family, and Jack could see the sadness in her eyes. Jack and Sarah agreed on a custody arrangement that allowed both of them to spend ample time with Emily. They were civil with each other, determined to keep the separation as smooth as possible for their daughter's sake. While Jack was hurt and angry, he knew that Sarah would always be part of Emily's life, and he didn't want their relationship to be a source of stress or bitterness for their child. The house, once filled with memories of laughter and family, now felt strangely empty. Jack found himself wandering from room to room, struggling to adjust to his new reality. At night, he would sit in the quiet living room, lost in thought, reflecting on the years he and Sarah had spent together. There were moments when he missed her, when he thought back to their happier times and wondered if things could have turned out differently. But he knew deep down that he had made the right choice. As the days turned into months, Jack started to piece his life back together. He focused on his work, finding solace in the steady rhythm of his job. His colleagues noticed the change in him, offering their support, and even Mark encouraged him to take up new hobbies. Jack appreciated the gestures, and he began exploring activities he had put aside over the years. He started running in the mornings, using the fresh air and physical activity as a way to clear his mind. Slowly but surely he felt himself healing. One weekend, Jack signed up for a woodworking class at a local community center. He had always been interested in working with his hands, and the thought of creating something tangible appealed to him. The class was a welcome distraction, and he found a sense of satisfaction in crafting small pieces of furniture, pouring his focus and energy into each project. It was there that he met Laura, a fellow classmate who had recently moved to Denver. Laura was warm and friendly, with a down-to-earth demeanor that put Jack at ease. They quickly bonded over their shared interest in woodworking, exchanging stories and laughing over their initial struggles with the tools. Laura was open about her own past, explaining that she, too, had gone through a difficult breakup a few years prior. Her honesty and resilience resonated with Jack, and he found himself looking forward to their time together in class. As their friendship grew, Jack felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time, a spark of hope, a sense of possibility. He was hesitant at first, worried that he was moving on too quickly or that he wasn't ready for a new relationship. But Laura's kindness and patience made him feel comfortable, and he soon realized that he genuinely enjoyed her company. They started spending time together outside of class, going for coffee and exploring local art galleries. With Laura, there was no pressure, no rush, just a genuine connection that felt easy and natural. One evening, after a particularly fun day spent hiking in the mountains with Laura, Jack found himself sharing parts of his life he had rarely discussed with anyone else. He told her about his marriage, the heartbreak, and his struggle to rebuild. Laura listened without judgment, her eyes full of empathy and understanding. For the first time, Jack felt like he could open up about his pain without being overwhelmed by it. Laura didn't try to fix him or offer empty platitudes. She simply listened, allowing him to unburden himself. As the months went by, Jack and Laura's friendship blossomed into something more. They took things slowly, both understanding the importance of healing and taking the time to truly know each other. Jack introduced Laura to Emily gradually, wanting to be sure that his daughter felt comfortable with the changes in their lives. To his relief, Emily warmed to Laura quickly, and the three of them began sharing small adventures together: visits to the zoo, picnics in the park, and movie nights at Jack's house. Through his time with Laura, Jack began to see himself in a new light. He had come to terms with the end of his marriage, and while he still felt moments of sadness or regret, he no longer let those emotions define him. He realized that he was stronger than he had ever given himself credit for, capable of starting over and building a life that was meaningful and fulfilling. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, watching the sun set over the city, Laura turned to him with a gentle smile. "You know, Jack, I think you're going to be okay. You've come so far, and I can see how much you love Emily and how hard you're working to give her the best life possible." Jack smiled, feeling a warmth he hadn't known in years. "Thank you, Laura. I don't know if I would have gotten through this without you. You helped me remember that there's still so much to look forward to, that life doesn't end because of one heartbreak." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the colors of the sky shift from orange to pink, and for the first time in a long while, Jack felt a sense of peace. He knew that life would continue to bring challenges, but he also knew he had the strength to face them, that he had found someone who understood him and accepted him as he was. As Jack walked back into the house that night, he glanced around, taking in the familiar surroundings with a new perspective. The walls that once felt empty and hollow now held the promise of new memories, of new beginnings. And as he prepared to put Emily to bed, he felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought him here. The road had been difficult, filled with pain and loss, but he had emerged stronger, wiser, and ready to embrace whatever the future held. For the first time in a long time, Jack felt whole. And as he closed his eyes that night, he knew he had finally found his way back to happiness. Emily had adjusted well to the new family dynamic, and she had developed a strong bond with Laura, who never tried to replace Sarah, but instead became a positive presence in her life. Laura's empathy and kindness helped Emily feel secure during the transition, and soon their outings together, whether hiking, cooking, or simply playing games at home, became treasured family traditions. The community that had once felt so tight-knit and routine now seemed vibrant and alive to Jack, full of people and places he had overlooked before. As he and Laura continued to enjoy woodworking together, they started creating small custom pieces, turning their hobby into a small business that quickly gained local interest. What had begun as a simple outlet for healing and distraction had now evolved into a passion they shared, bringing them closer while giving them a sense of accomplishment. Sarah was still a part of Emily's life, and over time, Jack found a way to coexist peacefully with her. Co-parenting required patience and understanding, and he had learned to set healthy boundaries, which ultimately made their communication smoother. They were both committed to Emily's happiness and well-being, putting their differences aside to ensure she felt loved and supported by both her parents. Occasionally, they would meet for Emily's school events, birthdays, and milestones, creating moments of shared pride and joy despite their past. With Laura by his side, Jack rediscovered the importance of embracing life with an open heart, of valuing the people who stood by him and recognizing his own resilience. Laura's steadfast presence showed him that love could be steady, compassionate, and unselfish. Their life was not without its challenges. Balancing work, parenting, and personal time required continuous effort. But together, they built a partnership rooted in shared values and a deep respect for one another. One bright autumn afternoon, as they were closing up their woodworking booth at a local craft fair, Jack took a quiet moment to look at Laura, who was talking with a customer. Watching her, he felt a quiet sense of gratitude that she had come into his life, that she had shown him a future he hadn't dared to imagine. He walked over to her, took her hand, and thanked her for everything she had done for him and for Emily. "Jack," she replied softly, her eyes warm, "you did the hard work. I just happened to be lucky enough to be here with you." Jack and Laura continued to build their lives together, filled with love, laughter, and the unwavering support they both had longed for. And while Jack's life had taken unexpected turns, he was grateful for the journey, knowing it had brought him to a place of peace and fulfillment he might never have found otherwise. In the end, Jack learned that life was not defined by a single chapter, and happiness could indeed be found again, even after heartbreak. The people he cherished, the memories they created, and the future he now looked forward to all served as reminders that growth and healing were possible, that the heart could mend, and that every end could be a new beginning.